Welcome to Biz Meds with Darris and Saad, where we give you the medications for your business. This podcast is all about the minimum effective doses you need to make a massive improvement in your business. Listen and enjoy. So this is the first ever podcast that we're here to do.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I'm actually really excited to do this. I think it's been a long time in the making.
Exactly. Excited, anxious. Words can't describe this. Honestly, there is a lot on my mind, and I guess we're just gonna get rolling.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about why we started the podcast and maybe a little bit about what we're aiming to do here. And so from my perspective, the podcast is really, the catalyst for it all was, providing value to people, like specifically like business owners, entrepreneurs that are out there, and they're trying to grow businesses, and what they feel like is that they're caught in this never-ending pull between two worlds where, they spend time scrolling on their phones or doing things they know they're supposed to do, but they don't do. Yeah. And then they feel guilty about not doing it. And you're caught from the other side where you have what we'll call the productivity porn gurus out there that make you feel like you need to optimize every minute of your life. And as I've worked with clients, I've been around, what I tend to see is that it's just so much overload. And people are struggling because it's not a really realistic approach to things, right? And so people then don't achieve things because they're caught and they're pulled in feeling like a failure, or they're just overwhelmed. And a lot of times it's, do you need to optimize every minute of your day? Probably not. Mm-hmm. There's such thing, and I remember the first time I heard the term was minimum effective dose, but in a business situation was for Tim Ferriss. Mm-hmm. When he, talked about a lot of, what we do. And so I think that was, for me, a good genesis to why I wanted to start this was, what are the minimum effective doses that we can give business owners to help them cut through kind of all the BS that's floating around in this world where, you're feeling like you have to optimize everything versus, we have our dopamine centers being hit constantly with social media and stuff like that.
And, I think this is an excellent platform to let all of the above, as you mentioned, like entrepreneurs, business owners, to let them know that they're not alone. Everybody has those problems, and it's a great. I think it's an easy way to help reach those people that might feel like they're alone in this journey, and they need, or maybe just kind of hearing our perspective on it might help them see how we have managed to make the best of every moment. And like you said, you really can't have every moment planned out. You can just maneuver around the best way you can with what you're given. So, I'm really excited about what this podcast is going to do and how it's going to help people, or at least the way we envision it to kind of make an impact. But yeah.
And I think we're aligned in that what we are aiming to do is just continually provide more and more value and tools, and specifically, what is the one thing that we can deliver with every episode to help reduce the overwhelm, the stress, the things, and help people cut through that to help them move forward. I think it's ultimately what we ended up trying to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so for those of you who don't know us.
Yeah. You go ahead.
My name is Darris. I've been coaching consulting for quite a few years, working with business owners, large corporations. I was very fortunate to grow up in business from the age of 12. I was doing books. I was doing the bookkeeping, sitting in a computer in this tiny little room for my dad for his forestry company, and really learned from the inside out how to run and grow a business. And by the time I was in my early 20s, it was we were helping run the third largest privately held forestry company in Canada. That's where we currently are. And I say that not to impress anyone. It's more to impress upon people. I, first of all, very fortunate to have grown up. And I think that, sometimes there is an element of being in the right place at the right time. And sometimes we hear people's stories like, oh my God, like they work so hard. And yes, like that is true. I think there's still something to be said about when you're in the right environment or you're in an environment that you can foster and learn from. Like those are extremely fortunate events. And I'm always very grateful that, I had a father that set a really good example for me in entrepreneurship, and he did great things and learned some tremendous examples from that. And then tried to continue that on throughout, the rest of my career and seeing where other business owners have struggled and where I had some successes and where specifically I've had failures. And I think that is a really important part of all of this learning. I've always maintained that life, especially on social media, becomes all about great editing. Right? Even when you view this podcast or listen to it, it's going to be edited and you're going to not hear the ums and all those things, right? That is essentially, we all look to this, what's great editing. And I think for me, it's about how do we cut through some of that stuff, talk about real things that help business owners, entrepreneurs, and people just in general.
Yeah. So to follow that, my name is Saad. I've been in the industry doing a lot of data stuff, and primarily kind of on the oil and gas side. And for that, it's just how Darris mentioned. It's always just been in the right place at the right time. And I've grown with the industry significantly on the technology side. And over the couple of years, I've been involved in a lot more of the business side as well. So I've been on a bit more of the back end on how like the businesses function and how data kind of is backing all of that decision making. And then our paths crossed a little while ago where both of us had similar ideas and ideologies in terms of how to help and grow people that are in the early stages or are looking for guidance from people that have done similar things before. And that's kind of allowed us to kind of come together and help put together this type of thought process and platform where we can collectively help or and at least show examples of what's previously been successful. Yeah.
So I don't know about you, Saad, but I fully go into this process really not knowing. I think we have an idea of where we want to go with this podcast. And so we hope what happens is that everyone is just really comfortable as we grow. And I think anyone who's kind of, it's like watching the beginning of a series of a TV show, right? First season, it's like, well, we'll see what happens, right? Here's the pilot. Do we like it? Maybe not. Yeah. Hopefully, we'll keep coming. Have enough really, we're going to hopefully make this entertaining enough and insightful and meaningful in short bursts so that, I don't think in the beginning we are too terribly inclined to do long sessions, long form. I think we really want to, it's about, let's dive into a topic, what is it? What does it mean? And what specifically, what's the one thing that you can do about it that's going to move the needle? So again, that idea of a minimum effective dose for your business, for your life.
Yeah. And frankly, I might want to add, and I think we're both aligned on this, is as this starts airing out and, we have more and more people hearing about this, we're open to hearing what you guys want to hear about and what it is that you might have some questions on and how we can kind of help that, kind of just provide our perspectives or maybe, bring anybody else along that wants to share their perspective as, we start growing. So I think it's an important thing where we incorporate your feedback on how we can make this better because as Darris mentioned, this is a pilot. And we're looking to make this as valuable as possible to you. So, yeah, that's.
So that being said, we thank you for watching and listening so far. Ideally, we're going to have this on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, so wherever you can find podcasts, and and additionally, if you catch one of our reels on Instagram, like, follow, share, all the same thing. And again, I think my part of the vision is we'll endeavor as long as we possibly can not to run ads. We have pretty big visions for this, and I think one of the things we always want to remain true to is you as the audience, and making sure that we're delivering value to you. So we'll see how it goes. We're so happy to have you along for the ride. And with that being said, we'll jump into the first topic. Okay, Saad. So here we are. I think we're going to do, this is part of our first ever podcast recording. And I know we spent a little bit of time going back and forth in the beginning before we decided, what we're going to land on to talk about today. And I think, as we were thinking through all the topics and what's going to be, again, the list is so long about things we could talk about and what's going to be impactful. I think there's going to be, as we agreed, I think there's one topic that is going to be really important for people. And I don't think the people or most people really appreciate how important it is. And I think as a society, business owners specifically, we run at a certain level continuously. And as a result, we feel just overwhelmed, stressed, burned out. And I think those are common things that people feel and not necessarily required all the time. And I think that, there's a time and a place to have those happen. And so with that, I guess I'll just introduce the first topic, and it's the idea of cognitive load. And so if you don't know what that is, I want you to think about a computer. Okay, so in your mind, you picture the computer, and in your computer, there's certain parts. And if you're familiar with computers, there's one part of a computer called the RAM. It's your random access memory, right? And that's basically holds all of the information at one time that's processing, and you have a certain amount. Well, our brains are, operate very similar. We have a processor, and we have a certain amount of things that we can hold attention and we can hold in our mind, and that's kind of our RAM. And I want you to think about the last time you've had your computer and you've had your internet browser and you have 1,000 tabs open, right? And you have all these applications running and things. And what happens to your computer?
Slows down.
Slows right down, right? Down. It just starts
crashing.
It starts crashing. And then, if you're a Windows user, maybe get the blue screen of death or something similar. That is, I think, one of the easiest ways to picture what happens with our brains and the idea of cognitive load. And so when all of the things in life are happening, we're trying to remember to do this. We have all these deadlines, we have these conversations playing, and what happens, or we have all these tasks that are accumulating. What happens is our cognitive load goes up, and we just reach a certain point where, we can't process anymore, right? Everything starts to slow down because it's backed up. And I think I can think back over the course of even my life and find, the times where I've been the most stressed, most overwhelmed. And that is when I can look back and I can actually understand that my cognitive load was so high. That's why I was feeling stressed out, burned out. What about you?
Well, even in today's, day and age for me, in my current life, I do, whenever there's more than one thing happening at once with several little tasks, it just feels like things are piling up so fast. And then I just find a mental freeze where I'm like, I need a moment to really understand how to move forward. And that in itself just feels like the biggest hurdle to get across. It's not even the task. It's just mentally just feels so blocked. And I think I'm not the only one when I say that, you just feel so overwhelmed. And you kind of look around because then you're wondering well, first of all, you don't want to come off as a failure because that in itself just feels like you are failing.
Right.
And then two, you're wondering how do you ask for help because nobody else will understand what you're going through. Right.
So interesting. So do you think no one understands, or is that perception, or is that our perception is that other people don't understand what it's like?
So I find that personally, I'm having because I'm so cognitively loaded, it feels like my communication is falling off, and I am not able to, elaborate or articulate what it is that I want to get across. So,
Okay.
yeah, that that is where that hurdle is in terms of like trying to, express what is going on, and it's harder because when you're in that state, no matter what anybody else says, it just feels like they don't understand.
Right. Okay. That's actually really interesting, and I think the reason this hits so close, and it's really close to my heart, is a few years ago, I went through an extreme version of overwhelm, burnout, all things, and I was actually having a tremendously difficult time with my sleep, in terms of like I couldn't wake up, or I was like I was falling asleep. But I'm not talking about 5 a.m. in the morning, right? Where, for some people it's like, oh, they get up 5 a.m. and they start their day immediately. It wasn't 6 a.m. It wasn't even 9 a.m. Right? I'm really talking about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and my whole body was shutting down. And I don't think I'd ever experienced a larger amount of just stress and burnout and overwhelm. And I know those terms got thrown around a lot, and and I spent a lot of time actually researching and trying to figure out why. And my frustration level was probably through the roof, because as I'm growing my consulting and coaching businesses and things like that, I'm looking around, I'm seeing these other, successful people not feeling this way. And so I can relate to the idea that it feels very lonely, and maybe they don't understand. And then what I discovered over the course of time was that principle of cognitive load. And so all of these things we're accumulating, and really not allowing me to perform. Mm-hmm. And as a result, my whole body started to shut down, and it was like a really difficult time for me. And when I discovered this idea of cognitive load, well, then the light switch went on. I was like, oh wow, it is really like a computer. You just like starts to chug along and then freeze. And as a result, you don't do anything, right? Because you feel you don't have the energy, you don't have, and suddenly you've lost the vision. You know what you want to do, need to do, but physically, I couldn't feel like I could do that. Yeah, and that's why I think like this day and age, most people don't even realize that they operate at such a high cognitive load, and they miss things because they're operating at such a high level all the time, or putting so much into their processing power that they're not able to really react to things appropriately, or kind of like take that step back.
And I want to add, like, it's not any, for me at least, it's also not just work. If I start getting, say, like 10 text messages, 10 Instagram messages, and then I have to get like, a project that I'm working on across the finish line, to get groceries done, I need to meal prep, like all of these things, like it's not just work related. It can be anything. And it wasn't up until like you and I started talking about this that just the idea of like identifying that it was cognitive load that was bringing me down. I just kind of turned the other cheek and was like, no, I'm going to tough it through. I know how to do it. But then at every corner, I kept coming back into the same problem. And it wasn't up until I really understood what the cognitive load issue was. It wasn't up until then that I realized how to navigate my way through across this. So I got a question for you.
Okay, absolutely.
You and I, we've talked about this before, but I want to ask you, like, what is the right steps to get through it, basically to navigate through this?
I struggle with what's the right step. So I can give some guidelines. I can give some suggestions. It's going to be a little bit different for everyone, right? So there's certain things that we can do. I think first and foremost is the idea that we do experience cognitive load. And I think you did a really great thing that I oversaw was it's not just related to business or work or the things that we do professionally. It is all of the additional things, right? Life comes. And so if you have kids, remembering what their schedules are, all of those things, and they add cognitive load, right? It's a little bit extra processing power continually. So one of the things that I have found that works really well, not only for myself, but for the people that we work with, and even you and I have had these discussions, right, is understanding where you can actually use decisions and rules to, you can leverage those indefinitely, all right? So I'll use this example because this helps me immensely. And this works for me. Again, everyone's going to be a little different, but I want to talk about framework. And I'm using an example because I think the framework is important. The specifics are not as important. It's defining and helping people understand what works for them. All right. So what this example is going to work for me, probably not going to work for you, but if you take the idea of it and implement that, that's the thing. And the key idea here is to leverage a decision or set of rules that help you not have to think about something. So, I go to the gym quite regularly, right? And one of the things that I don't want to have to think about is creating a workout plan, right? I do not like having to think about going to the gym and figuring out what exact workout I have to do. So I trade money, right, for a service from a coach that takes care of that for me. I can discuss what I want to do, what's important to me, like what my goals are, and I then employ them to help me. So I leverage their skill set and everything to build that workout plan for me. As well as, some coaches, again, this is my example, even a nutrition plan. For me, what works is I will eat the same thing day in and day out, 8,000 days in a row of chicken. We laugh about that. It's 8,357 of chicken. But that type of thing works for me, right? Some people may, if they're doing that, say, oh, I want that, my coach to really develop I just want them to tell me what all the meals would be and have them different. And that's fine, right? Because that reduces the amount of energy you have to then spend planning on doing that. And that's why, sometimes meal prep and everything works really effectively because you're reducing cognitive load. You now are not thinking on a Sunday every day. You're reclaiming that decision-making energy so that you can employ that day-to-day on higher level tasks. So that's an example. Another example would be, and, love or hate this example, I really don't care. It's, there's a lot of stuff on social media about, Steve Jobs wore the same clothing all the time. There is some merit to that, right? If you think about your wardrobe and how much time you might spend in the morning just deciding what it is you're going to wear for the day, could you simplify? Could you spend maybe 30 seconds the night before, pick it out, so in the morning it's execute. You not have to think about that, right? It's all of those decisions, micro decisions that, they start to accumulate and hence cognitive load. So does that give a good example and framework? So I think that's an important one.
Can I just hop in there for a quick second? I really like the fact that you said that it's a framework. It's not like the schedule that you have to follow. Because one thing I personally found was that I was trying to implement somebody else's schedule onto my life that I thought worked really, really well for them, but it wasn't for my personality type. There's some people that, get up at 5 a.m. and they know what the heck they're doing. They get going. Some people can wake up at that 5 a.m. mark, but they don't really feel the motivation and energy coming in until 11, 12, right? So trying to force yourself into somebody else's schedule versus figuring out something that works for yourself was a big learning experience for me. I really, really resonate with the sentiment of having a framework that, gives you an idea of how to do it and then implement it for your lifestyle.
So I think there's two things that makes me think of additional frameworks, and the idea, and if anyone listens to Alex Hormozi, I highly recommend, listening to him in terms of taking really broad, complex, ideas and boiling them down really simple. Alex Hormozy does a fantastic job. And so I love listening to him because a lot of the experience I've had over my career and yours, they're summed up really succinctly. I love it. What he's a big proponent of, it's not the morning routine that's going to make you money. It's the actions, right? And this is where I come, that whole idea, like, when we introduced the podcast of, most people are pulled between these two worlds. Well, when you try to, this is where that peak performance and productivity porn gurus love to live, right? And a lot of them are, these scientists, whatever, and they overanalyze everything. They go down these rabbit holes of things, and it's got to be optimized. There is a point where trying to maintain that creates cognitive load, right? And now you feel guilty and all of these things because you didn't operate at that level, and you're made to feel like you're a failure that way, right? Another layer of cognitive load that comes on that, and then again is demotivating, overwhelming, prevents forward movement because you have this idea that that's what you need to operate at. So, and that ties in to this another framework that was brought to my attention, and it's the idea of rational versus reasonable. So this is this kind of made my mind just really pop, even when I work with clients, even in my own life, and it just brought actually reduced cognitive load quite a bit for me, just how I view the world. And this is probably the first time you and I are talking about this. This is perfect. Yeah. This is just a perfect example. When we talk about all that optimization, right? And we talk about peak performance, and peak performance is thrown out all around. And, you have to do this. You see David Goggins running around. You don't know me, son. Yeah, you got to execute. Yeah. And okay, great. Yeah. That's great. That works for you, David. In your world, that might be reasonable, right? And it might be actually rational. So if you think about rational does it make sense that you would optimize every part of your life so you had to make as few decisions as possible? That's rational, is it not?
Yeah.
Right? Is it always reasonable? So
you got me there.
This is the kicker. This is the absolute kicker. So is it reasonable? And, a lot of that really came, as, we developed the course and stuff, and we're not really talking about that, but it was really around the genesis of that was, do you need to optimize every minute of your life, or can we have trade-offs? Is it more effective to, operate peak for a short period of time and then kind of come out of that and go to this other thing? I think that's more reasonable because life happens. If you have kids, right, your kids aren't going to operate on your predetermined schedule 100% of the time. So there's got to be some reasonableness built into that.
Yeah, you got to have the variables open there.
Yeah.
So what you just shared reminds me of an example of just from my life. So I work very heavily on my schedule, and every time I have an empty slot, that's where I'll fit in what I need to get done. So, and this is something that I've dealt with us two working together, where there's something that needs to get done. I'll see an empty slot in my calendar. I'll put it in there, and I'll know that, this is the time available slotted for this. A friend of mine asked me, hey, how are you always so booked up in advance, and how are you always you're never available spontaneously? For my life, I like to optimize my schedule in the way that works for me. So I'll have everything planned in the best way possible. There are, variables that pop up here and there, but in the best way possible for me, I'll have it planned. So my friend tried to implement the same thing, and
let me guess. It didn't work.
It did not work.
Imagine that.
It did not work. Because the thing is, we also live in a society now where, we got all these smartwatches, smartphones, and they're constantly dinging and ringing and reminding you, hey, you're behind on this. This is 15 minutes overdue. What are you doing here, right? So that in itself feels like a failure, right? So, it just kind of reminded me of that, and I thought it was a funny segue into that story. But yeah.
Oh, I get it, right? And I think we see this, I think, floating around social media, and the genesis of this podcast was really to dispel some of this stuff. Right. Not that it's not right or wrong. There's an element of just what works and what doesn't work. And what works for me may not work for you. That's why I think it's really important for us to both bring things back to a framework. And that and the foundation for that is rational versus reasonable. So while it might seem completely rational to do something and go full in, is it reasonable given all your circumstances? And you are really the only one that can answer that question. And the last thing I'm going to say about that is, do I also believe that there are times where you have to be irrational and do things that are unreasonable for a short period of time? Absolutely.
Yep.
Right? When you're trying to take advantage of something, or you need to create a lot of momentum, right? I think the mistake people make is they believe they have to operate at that level all the time, and you just can't.
Yep.
You cannot operate at that level all the time. And we'll probably get into this in another podcast. But even the idea of like getting into a flow state and a really productive state, they're just neurochemically intensive. You burn all of those neurochemicals up. You have to recover those. You have to replenish them. And so you can't operate in a state where it's just continuous. It's why it's an actual state, and then you come out of it. And you can't just live there. So that's kind of my final, you kind of sum up on that. So I think to wrap up, I think our first thing, it's really, let's keep it short, keep it tight.
Yeah.
We talked about cognitive load, some of the things that contribute to it, how it really impacts our day-to-day, and where we can help to start implementing a framework, right? So where we can eliminate decision fatigue. So can we leverage rules? Can you set up a certain time where you do something every day so you don't have to think about it, right? So for me, I go to the gym at a certain point, basically every day like clockwork. It's just, I don't have to think about it, right? My meals already planned out. Again, could you do other things out there that could reduce decision fatigue, right? So instead of, one of the things that used to get me was, I got to clean my house, right? Guess what? I understand that not everyone's able to do this. It's more about the framework. What are the things that you can do or implement that are going to reduce the things that you have to do? Where is your time and money better spent to leverage to free up your energy and especially your mental energy? Exactly. Right? Yeah. And I think that's how you start to reduce cognitive load. And that's the first step, because most of the things that people talk about, or you have to do this now, you have to add this on. And what all that does, especially as I found with a lot of business coaches in general, I'm going to add. And all that does for a lot of people is increases cognitive load. And guess what? Like, we end up in the same thing all the time.
Yep.
So is that anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's an excellent point to end it at. And, we've covered a lot of different areas. So yeah, I think this is a good ending point.
Awesome. So again, I want to thank everyone who's still listening and potentially watching.
Yeah.
Thank you. Without you, and probably this is going to be our moms that are going to be the ones that are watching this. Mom, thanks, you.
Mom.
And maybe our family members and our close friends that are just, nice enough to do us the...
Appreciate the support every minute, that you've spent listening to this. I really, really very much appreciate it.
Absolutely. And we want to hear from you. So again, if you, whatever platform you're on, we want to hear from you. What would you like to see? And I think the last thing is, if you've learned anything from this, the only thing we can ask is just to share it. Share it with someone. Share it with someone who might benefit from that. And that's how we'll continue to grow this, with your support. And again, we want to be here to support everyone here.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.